Have you ever felt your drums just don't hit the way that they're supposed to? Or your guitars never sound as wide as they're supposed to. Well, sit tight because in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down all the issues that you're probably having with phase. When your phase isn't right, your drums aren't going to be punchy, your vocal layers are not going to be wide, and it's going to be the same thing with your guitars, DI or mic'd, and you'll be dealing with lots of phase cancellation. You're probably wondering why you didn't hear me right there. That's exactly what phase cancellation is. It just completely kills the frequencies on both sides. If you're wondering why I was doing that, I'm just showcasing exactly what phase cancellation does. Just makes the audio go away completely. We're gonna go through the 5 ways of avoiding phase issues. Check phase coherence during recording. First, you have to understand what phase coherence is. It's when there's a constant phase difference that exists between any 2 signals or waves of the same frequency. So essentially, when you're using multiple microphones to record the same source, the time traveled from the source to both microphones is going to be the same. That way, if you wanted to align the phase, you could just move one of those audio files by a number of milliseconds or samples, and the track would be fixed entirely. Watch this example of guitars being moved into phase. Did you hear that difference there? You have to pay attention to phase coherence during the recording process. Make sure the microphones are properly positioned and phase relationships between multiple mics on the same source, example like drums and guitar cabinets, are checked and adjusted if needed. Proper microphone placement and phase alignment during the recording phase can really prevent these phase issues from ever happening in the first place. This is only for when you're miking up amps, by the way. If you recorded 2 DIs of guitars and panned them, there's no phase coherence. And if there was, it would sound pretty stereo and not as wide as you want your stereo field to be. But here's another tip to help you deal with phase. And this one's really easy. Use phase flip alignment tools. Every DAW, or at least the ones that I've used, have phase flip or alignment tools that can help you align the phase of multiple tracks. And this can be a godsend when it comes to drums because you might not even realize something's out of phase without testing it. Watch how powerful phase flipping can be. Depending on what you do with the phase, you can either reinforce frequencies or cancel them out. You can literally hear the kick sub cancel out with a click, which is kind of crazy because a click can make sure my subs aren't canceled out. Hit that subscribe button, notification bell, and like button if you're loving the content. Transition gain stronger than a phase aligned snare drum. Let's get back to it. Use this as a tool to be positive that the waveforms of tracks with similar audio sources are aligned in phase, helping to prevent cancellation or reinforcement issues during mixing. It can make all the difference, but mostly on drums. I've almost mixed drums by just getting them into phase before. And make sure to check this with your sample drum libraries because, believe it or not, those aren't always in phase. Using a phase switch might not always be accurate enough, which brings us to number 3. Check phase relationships visibly. You have to inspect the waveforms of your tracks to check for phase cancellation or reinforcement issues. Look for areas where waveforms are crossing, are overlapping excessively, which may indicate potential phase problems. Adjust the timing alignment of tracks as needed to minimize phase conflict. Let's zoom in on a waveform really close to show the right way to phase align. This is a must when you're dealing with drum shells. And if you're going off of triggers, it gets more annoying because you have to line each one of the hits up so that none of it is out of phase. Tedious task, but it's the difference between an amateur and a pro. And speaking of another pro move, let's get on to the 4th way of avoiding phase issues. Use a linear phase EQ. When applying EQ to tracks, use phase-specific ones such as linear phase EQ or minimum phase EQ to avoid introducing phase issues. Linear phase EQs maintain coherency but introduce latency. That's why you either have to have a powerhouse of a computer to use or use them sparingly. And I think a lot of people don't realize when you EQ a source that you're altering the phase, especially when you're doing drastic boosts and cuts. To make sure it's not an issue, you need an EQ that's designed to avoid that. What most of us are probably using is minimum phase EQs, and while these EQs don't introduce latency, they can affect phase relationships. Choose the appropriate EQ type based on the requirements of your mix. And as a rule of thumb, when you're putting something on your master bus, make sure you're using a linear phase, because it's just to be safe, because you don't want to create phase issues throughout your entire mix with a single plugin instance. On to our final way of avoiding phase issues. Listen critically. Use your ears, bro. Just use your ears. I know that always sounds like troll advice, but it's real. You have to critically listen for any phase-related issues in your mix. Pay attention to audible comb filtering or cancellation effects where certain frequencies are exaggerated or attenuated due to these conflicts. And if you don't know what comb filtering is, you're about to. And that's not my favorite sound in the world. You have to make adjustments to the timing or alignment of the tracks, as well as EQ settings as needed to achieve a more phase coherent mix. So let's go over all of these one more time. Check phase coherency during recording. Use phase flip alignment tools. Check phase visually. Use a linear phase EQ, and listen critically. Remember, phase issues can impact the clarity and balance of your mix. Being mindful of phase coherence during recording, using phase flip alignment tools, visually checking for the conflicts, using phase-specific EQ techniques, and listening critically can help you avoid phase-related problems and achieve a more professional and polished mix. I promise, if you watch out for these issues and stay cognizant of them, you just won't have these problems ever again, and your mixes are gonna sound better than ever. Do you have a phase trick that you use? Are you gonna apply any of this knowledge to your future mixes? Leave it in the comments below, and I'll chat with you fine people, like I always do.